President Xi Jinping of China finally came out of the thing this week, I think it was, where he just went, all right, we're playing the entity list game, are we?
He's got a Cockney accent.
Yeah.
All right, mate. All right.
Are you suggesting I do a shit Chinese accent?
He's based in Chinatown in London.
I think in the current cultural climate, I don't think I could get away with that. So I'm going to stick with it. He goes,
All right.
Tramp, shut it.
All right, lads.
Hello and welcome back to the Telecoms.com podcast. I think it's been 2 months, so I'm really, really sorry. It's been a variety of reasons. Jamie cleared off to go and do PR for Vodafone. There's been all the lockdown and the coronavirus and all that sort of thing, and people have been on holiday, and there's been various other reasons why people haven't been able to make it. So this is the first time we've got our shit together enough to come into the office, which, is...
Or even, we haven't even done a Zoom call actually, have we, for about 2 months? I think the last one was in the office.
It was Jamie's last one.
Yep.
And anyway, the office ones are much better if we can come in. But who knows how long that's going to carry on as the government's threatening to lock down. Anyway, cheers guys. So
good
we're
to
happy
be
to be back. Cheers.
Oh,
that was probably one of the ones that was in my bag.
Shaken up on the train.
Yeah, it's exploded here.
No, they're all exploding. So I tell you what, talking about these beers.
Cheers.
We've got 8 in total, and you brought 6, and I originally brought 3, but one of them just disappeared on the train.
It must have fallen out.
It was really weird. I mean, look, it definitely wasn't me drinking it, because I wouldn't break the law by taking my mask off.
No.
So it just must have been one of those.
Aren't you allowed
mysterious...
to drink and eat?
I don't know.
Or smoke.
Yeah.
Out the window.
I don't know, but I'd like it to make it very clear to our law enforcement community, who seem to be much more concerned with nicking people for not wearing masks than solving actual crimes, that I definitely didn't drink that tin on the way down. So
this will be scrutinised by Her Majesty's government and then compared.
I'll be looking at the video and
footage.
seeing how my irises dilate. So that was all jolly good. So, I mean, obviously we're not going to recap 2 months worth of stuff, although effectively we are, because I don't think much has really changed, has it?
Same old stories.
Same old stories. So we're going to start off with, you guessed it, Huawei. Start off with Huawei, latest developments on that, and then we're going to move on to, again, you guessed it, OpenRAN, the latest developments. These are just the mega trends of our industry, aren't they? And then the last one we're going to talk about is Mobile World Congress, which is obviously a sort of mega event of our industry, but there's recent news about that. Mm-hmm. And just to remind you that, so just clearing a little beer bubble there.
I thought you would have forgotten.
You thought I was going to forget? Oh no, I'm far too professional for that. It's just to remind you that if you're watching this on Facebook or on YouTube, this is just hardwired into my head now.
Yeah.
Watching on Facebook, YouTube, or the site, you can also listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and loads of other podcasting platforms. Okay, so Huawei. So the real Huawei news for me is more to do with the US-China spat. So at some time between the last podcast and this, I believe, or maybe not, actually, it could have been all the way back in May. I can't remember, I lose track of time.
I think it was before. Are you going to talk about the UK government ban? Or?
No, I was going to talk about the US raising the stakes. No, that was more recent. So,
well, they've done a couple of things recently, haven't they? Because they already had that sanctions, but then it seemed to get tightened up even more.
It got tightened up, and basically more got put. More got put on the NC list. And
I didn't really understand the distinction, I have to say, with those latest sanctions, because I never thought there was in the original ones there was a kind of thing about generics are okay, but stuff that's designed and customised.
So where my understanding of where they ramped it more was very specifically on the semiconductor side. They were trying to close loopholes on the semi. So clearly the US strategy is to drive Huawei smartphones out of business.
Well, some people still think that it isn't. That's the interesting thing.
I don't see...
Which is
every act it's done seems pointed in that direction. Because this latest one was saying...
Only smartphones, though, not other bits of the Huawei business.
Yes, it's very specifically directed at silicon, chips.
Yeah.
And specifically,
they're also used in some parts of the network.
Yeah, understood.
And the whole campaign in terms of 5G being, Huawei's 5G being bad seems to be very network oriented, and less sort of
totally. But this chip assault, my assessment of it is it's quite smartphone focused.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I don't know much about the chips they use in their networking gear, but I suspect they are a bit easier to get hold of equivalent versions of. Whereas, smartphones are basically a semiconductor arms race. Each new generation of a smartphone's got a faster, better chip in it.
The TSMC supplies a lot of that stuff that gets used apparently in their 5G radio gear, as well as servers that they use in the sort of enterprise market. And everything I've read and have sort of tried to cover over the last few months has been, the analysts that I've spoken to have said, yes, they can get, they might be able to get alternatives to that, but they're not going to be able to get stuff that's as good, basically. Those restrictions that cut TSMC out of the picture.
Yeah.
And pretty much everybody
with
seems to rely on American chip-making equipment. So you'd be falling back on stuff that's really quite substandard, I think.
Well, so that's what they really re-emphasised with this latest one, is that you can't even buy any products where anything involving US intellectual property has been involved in the making of it. Yeah. So like the most well-known maker of the kind of really pricey kit that goes in chip fabs is Applied Materials. Yeah. And so you can't, the US is now saying if any chip has been made with any Applied Materials kit, then that doesn't count. And I think that was...
But that was May, if I remember right.
Yeah, but they kind of re-emphasised it.
Since then,
I'm not sure what loopholes there were in there. Yeah. So I agree. We were writing about TSMC distancing themselves from Huawei back in May. I think one of the things is SMIC.
Yeah. Well, there's even a specific campaign against SMIC now,
yes,
isn't
there
there?
is,
Where they're on the kind of shit list.
That's one of our. I got told off for putting shit list in a story.
Did you?
Someone said, I appreciate your perspective. I think this is about a thing that's coming up to do with China making its own one. And he said, I really appreciate the story. It's great insight, but I don't appreciate you putting the word S''T in it in the comments. And
why are people so prudish these days?
I don't know.
I read George Orwell
bad
recently.
people list.
This is a total tangent, but I read Down and Out in Paris and London.
Oh, right, I've never read that.
And there's a whole section on, this is written in the 1930s, there's a whole bit about use of the word fuck by the English working classes.
Right.
So Pierre's going to bleep that now, but maybe not because it's Orwell that said it.
He's only on about a 50% success rate.
And he was saying there'll come a
Pierre,
time when the word fuck is used in polite conversation and it's not considered to be...
Whereas it's beyond the pale back in the 30s.
This is almost 100 years ago, you got to think now.
It was the equivalent of today.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, come on.
Pierre just been telling me not to say that word.
Where were we?
Oh yes.
You got in trouble for using the word shit list.
Oh yeah, and anyway, I just had to summon all my reserves of maturity to not just put underneath it shit. And in the end, I just went, oh well, one out of two ain't bad. Well, I don't want to be hostile to people who comment on my stories unless they start it, and even then, I try not to be dragged in. But yes, I was tempted to just be really childish, but I resisted. Anyway, so there was that SMIC bit of news, and the way I editorialised that was just, and all of this, by the way, is said without passing any ultimate judgment on the validity of the US action against China. We all know China is got up to no good back in the day.
Yeah.
We all know that they're as fiercely competitive as any country in the world and will do what it takes to prevail. I'm making no moral judgment or even qualitative judgment one way or the other, but it did strike me as absurd that a Chinese semiconductor company has to apply for US permission to supply a Chinese vendor.
And also, why would it necessarily... Because I remember a few weeks ago, before the latest closing of the loopholes happened, some analysts were saying, well, maybe SMIC... Because apparently SMIC uses American equipment, Applied Materials, like
I don't think you can get around
whichever one it was, Teradyne, there's another one. I don't know which one it is. But anyway, people were saying, well, SMIC just might not follow the US... I mean, they've probably got installed equipment they can carry on using. Now, okay, I guess in future, maybe Applied Materials or whoever their supplier isn't going to supply to them the latest gear.
But it's also interconnected.
But why would they necessarily just go, oh, because we're using this bit of design tooling or whatever it is, we're going to stop supplying Huawei as a Chinese company? Why would they do that? I don't.
Presumably because they're afraid of having similar sanctions that have been laid on Huawei thrown at them.
But what else could I mean, that's already happened though, hasn't it? In a way, with
well, no, but they could make it specifically. Now, no one's allowed to go within 10 miles of SMIC, no matter what.
Right.
Yeah, there's no.
They've just got so much power in the market, the US, that they're able to wield it like a.
And that's what I feel like they're kind of overplaying it. I don't like, if I was forced to choose between Team US and Team China, I'd probably pick Team US because they're Anglophone. We've got more culturally in common.
They're not a bunch of dictators.
And and because they have, I suppose, for want of a better word, the democracy.
Not a very good one.
Although it's a bit of a shit show at the moment, that's for sure. But, they haven't got a guy like Xi who's just come up and gone, look, I'm in charge forever, so just shut up.
Yeah, that's never a good thing. It didn't work out well in the past.
No, it's never a great thing, except for the lad himself. So, I'd have to pick one. But I do think that it's not healthy for any one country, no matter who it is, to just be able to go to any other company in the world and go, right, we're just closing you down.
Yeah.
It seems very unilateral, very absolute.
The thing that confuses me about what's going on at the moment is these reports, and we covered this because I did get confirmation from Intel this morning actually about getting a license to allow it as a sort of way around the latest regulations. So it basically means so as far as I'm aware, Intel mainly sells certain semiconductors that are used in servers that Huawei makes under its Xeon brand.
Yeah.
So it's not really maybe much to do with the smartphone business.
Certainly
at all,
not.
which is not where Intel plays.
I could spend a whole podcast telling you how rubbish Intel are.
And maybe
mobile.
not much to do with the network equipment market either. It's probably more the sort of enterprise stuff that Huawei
servers,
which is
definitely.
A relatively small part of Huawei's business.
But we're getting towards like mobile edge and that sort of thing now.
And I'm sort of, and I know there are some analysts who still when the SMIC stuff came out, that they were putting that on the naughty list. I remember there's a guy called Richard Windsor who's an analyst with a company called Radio Free Mobile.
Yeah, I think that's his own
It's his own thing.
Isn't it? It's a one-man band.
He's mainly well known to people in the industry because he used to work for Nomura a few years ago and was very, very well respected.
Oh, so he's
proper sort of
equity
guy,
analyst
really
kind
knows
of guy.
His stuff.
Right.
And his view in this
I get his newsletter.
This blog he wrote about SMIC, which included Huawei in it, is that he doesn't think the US goal is to drive Huawei or SMIC out of business. He still sees all of this as a kind of, a bit of leverage, a bit of sort of exerting pressure.
Yeah, I think he's right. But if you're going to make a threat, it has to be a specific threat. You can't just say or else. And the or else in this case is or else we drive their smartphone business into the ground.
But they're not. There's no sign so far that they're getting something out of China on the trade front. In fact,
no, but that's another matter.
It's driving them the other way, and yet they've gone and issued a license to Huawei. To Intel. That means business as usual, which to me seems quite odd, given that you look at how sort of unambiguously aggressive they've been in terms of the restrictions this year. And I've been writing stories saying clearly the purpose is to finish Huawei off if possible.
Well, the purpose is to have the threat. The demonstrable threat of finishing off their smartphone business. But with the Intel thing, I mean, don't underestimate the power of lobbying from within.
Yeah, I guess.
So Intel will be lobbying like crazy, saying, you're robbing us of a ton of cash here.
Well, this is, I mean, my take on it to some extent. I said one sort of maybe cynical interpretation is that the US has thought, well, the bigger picture is not going to change things, just because Intel's selling a few sort of server chips to Huawei and its extra business while Huawei has to deal with all this other shit we've thrown its way. We can still carry on supporting a company like Intel and it carries on doing business as normal.
It's inconsistent. It's very piecemeal. But that's the Trump way, isn't it? He just makes stuff up on the fly.
Yeah, maybe there isn't a broader strategy. Maybe you can overthink.
How much evidence have you ever seen of Trump having much of a strategy about anything other than what he is famously is a tough negotiator, and I think that's hard to argue with.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think a real test of all this sanction stuff will be not so much Intel, but whether Qualcomm gets a license.
Yeah.
Because if Qualcomm gets a license, then Huawei's still in the in the flagship smartphone game
Yeah.
because the latest Snapdragons are as good as their Kirins.
But not in the network game, presumably, as much of these. Because it still seems to have that big issue with trying to find an alternative to TSMC, which has already stopped.
And they make their own
supplying
network chips, like Nokia tries to.
Well, the way I understand that it works is Huawei's silicon subsidiary, which is called HiSilicon.
HiSilicon,
HiSilicon, basically designs the chips.
Yeah.
And then the manufacture of them gets outsourced to TSMC.
Yeah, that's how it works generally.
Which contributes a bit of its own expertise because it has these manufacturing processes that are very sophisticated, which are usually measured in nanometers, I think. It's
That's
down
right.
to like 7 nanometers. Now, everybody says that with... if they had to shift to an alternative like SMIC, one of the problems is that they're just not quite sophisticated on that front.
Yeah, those manufacturing processes are the arms race of silicon because they basically determine how many transistors you can cram onto one given bit of wafer.
And the trouble is that the higher the number goes, basically what it means is that your gear is not quite as efficient, not quite as capable. So
it's not as competitive.
Yeah, and then they're going to lose position in the market anyway, because which operator, regardless of government pressure or what's happening on the geopolitical front, when operators look at which vendors to choose, they go, we want power efficient stuff. We want things that are...
To some extent, I just still don't, and I don't know the answer to this, but I'm throwing it out there. I know that in mobile, the manufacturing process is a massive advantage because in mobile, you've got very constrained space, you've got very constrained available power. And you've also got a great need to minimise heat output.
Yep.
All those three reasons are the main reasons why Intel was never going to be able to hack it with x86 as opposed to ARM microarchitecture in mobile because it was just too hot and power inefficient. So you'd end up with a phone that the battery would last a couple of hours and it'd burn a hole in your arse.
Yeah.
Another.
No, it's the same in network equipment. As far from talking to
So
people,
that's what I was going to guess.
It's not quite the same, but basically that nanometer thing translates into performance issues, higher weight for all things like that, basically. So the key KPIs that an operator is going to look at and say, it's basically going to drive up your costs. It's going to lower your performance if you can't get the most sophisticated manufacturing
here's
processes.
a thought, though. I know we've done podcasts in the past noting how Nokia hasn't been quite as good as networking silicon as it would like.
Yeah.
But it's still all right at it, and it's one of the few specialists out there. So theoretically, whether or not this would ever happen, Nokia could sell its networking chips to Huawei because Nokia's Finnish. But then they'd probably find some way of going, but the bloke who made the chips once had a McDonald's and that's an American restaurant, so you can't do it.
I don't know if they make them either, though. Aren't they in the same situation as Huawei? They're not a fab, are they? They're not... I think they design stuff, and then they have contract manufacturers making it, or they get the FPGAs that they were using in...
right, so you've still hit that fab bottleneck, good point, yeah.
And I think the same goes for Ericsson. They rely on sort of...
Yeah, there's no one who has their own fabs except Samsung and Intel. Everyone else is fabless. Everyone else has to go through TSMC or Global Foundries or whatever.
Or SMIC. Or SMIC, however it's pronounced or whatever.
SMIC, I like that. SMIC to its mates.
Yeah. And so people have been saying Samsung could be an alternative for Huawei too.
But then they'll still use applied materials gear. And it's also...
They will, and also it seems like they do so much work in the US that they wouldn't want to sort of risk aggravating the US, from what I've been told. But.
Well, quite. So that's the long and short of it is the US can claim through its general tech sector preeminence to shut down anyone, anytime. And then, I'll move it on because Pierre's got hard cut off. He's got grown-up stuff to do. The President Xi Jinping of China finally came out of the thing this week, I think it was, where he just went, all right, we're playing the entity list game, are we?
He's got a Cockney accent.
Yeah.
All right, mate. All right.
Are you suggesting I do a shit Chinese accent?
He's based in Chinatown in London.
I think in the current cultural climate, I don't think I could get away with that. So I'm going to stick with it. He goes,
All right.
Trump, shut it.
All right, lads.
You fucking muppet.
His Chinese accent is the equivalent of that Cockney
There we
accent.
are.
Give it Guy Ritchie. Xi Jinping.
Yeah, whatever a really strong Beijing accent is, that's what he's got. And So yeah, he's just come out with his own list. And I got someone on Twitter appreciated my first line of it where I said she's making
That was good.
a list, checking it twice. But that's what it is, and it's very vague. They've just come out. Their announcement came out with all these things of, the usual pious. We reserve the right to protect our security and our interests and all that sort of thing. Real boilerplate stuff.
Yeah.
And then some stuff about, this is how you might end up on the list. But the long and short of it was, we can stick anyone on the list we want. They didn't name any companies. They didn't name any countries. But I don't think you've got to be the biggest conspiracy theorist in the world to think some US companies like to find themselves on the list.
Maybe Apple.
Well, that would be the killer. I think that would be the WMD option.
Yeah.
Second might be Qualcomm.
Mm-hmm.
But, Apple's market in China is colossal.
Massive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It'd be too bad for them.
Yeah, it'd be a nightmare for them. I mean, it certainly wouldn't kill them because Apple's just got so much money.
Yeah, but it'd cut them down to size quite a bit, wouldn't it?
Tim Cook would just be like, "Oi, just go get a box of money out to see us going." Do you know what? I don't know what it is. They've got more cash in reserve than the GDP of most
I can't
countries.
understand. I mean, we're getting off topic here, but I still can't understand how they do it year after year personally. But I say that as an Apple customer. So
Well, it's the margins.
yeah,
I mean, the margins on other phone, the price of other phones have caught up, but for a while, certainly when I was a smartphone analyst, an iPhone cost about a couple £100 more than the equivalent sort of flagship Samsung,
yeah,
and that was all profit because the Samsung, we did a sort of estimate
yeah,
or a calculation of profit versus the estimated bill of materials and cost of sales and all that sort of thing. And basically everyone else was on single figures % profit and Apple was on, 50%. No, probably not that high. Let's say 30%.
yeah.
So, and they owned something like 95% of all the profit made by all the smartphones was just Apple.
Bloody hell.
So basically, just to close the tangent, is because they've got their own ecosystem, their own operating system, their own uniqueness, that they can charge that premium, and of course the brand itself.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you Apple fanboys decide whether you think that premium is justified. And like I said, the other guys have sort of caught up a little bit.
Yeah. But people still. I mean, they've jacked up the prices of their, MacBooks and all that lot recently,
I know.
and people still go out and buy them. So,
Yeah, I just bought my dad one. It wasn't cheap.
God, they cost a fortune. I wanted to get another one because my old one's 7 years old, doesn't really work very well anymore. But
Absolute entry level pikey version is £1,000.
1,200, yeah.
Yeah.
You can refurbish one for $1,000 that are MacBook Pros.
Yeah, I just couldn't be bothered.
Oh.
It might have been shit. Anyway, at least if it's new, you've got a direct sort of umbilical link to Apple where you can
No,
hassle them.
refurbished by Apple is what I mean.
Yeah,
That's the same thing.
and I bet they'll still take you to the cleaners. Anyway,
Probably.
that's what they do. Okay, so that was all the Huawei-ness. But the only other sort of Huawei thing, I'm just checking the most read stories in the last week or so for us, is I wrote one, just a bit of journalism about Chinese consumers reportedly rushing to buy Huawei phones while they still can.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of interest that got makes me suggest that there's probably something in it. So, there is going to come a time Huawei can't produce its own Kirin chips because of their TSMC thing, can't buy Qualcomm chips, can't even buy MediaTek chips.
Yeah.
Looks like can't even use SMIC to have a go at making maybe some 2-year-old Kirin chips. So it stands to reason, however much they've stockpiled, that they're going to run out of chips.
Yeah.
And without a chip, it's just a brick, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Maybe they can move into the bricks business. You could build a house with Huawei phones or something.
Brick lane.
People do it with Lego, Why
Hey,
not use Huawei phones?
If you could build a house with only made of Nokia's 3310s, that'd be a tough house.
It'd be, people would like it from a design perspective,
Yeah.
but it'd make it into magazines.
the only other thing worth mentioning is they've just done one of their events, Huawei Connect, and they were basically sort of trying to sound a defiant note. But the biggest thing they were calling on is just basically saying to their partners, look, hanging in there,
Right.
don't abandon us.
It's getting a bit desperate, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I was sympathetic when I wrote that, putting myself in their position. What else can they say?
Yeah.
I don't think it serves their purposes to be too overtly belligerent to the States.
No.
Leave that to Xi, who actually has gone quiet on all that, except for this list. But he hasn't specifically mentioned the US. So anyway, that's it. All right, we better move it on anyway. Ian.
Yeah.
So yes, we got our new dialogue format.
I know. Well,
there's that elephant in the room.
Half an hour now already.
Yeah, the elephant in the room that isn't Jamie. Yeah. So I'll pass the ball back to you. You have been writing a lot about OpenRAN for a change.
Yeah, I always write a lot about OpenRAN, but there's always stuff happening. So
yeah, go for it. So give us a lowdown.
I mean, I suppose a lot of it's driven by news from Rakuten over the last couple of weeks. I mean, they're increasingly sort of having press conferences, actually, and trying to get news out there. They're really sort of leading the charge and all of that. And whenever they have something to say, it's always linked to OpenRAN, because they have this claim that they have the first sort of commercial OpenRAN deployment in the world in a kind of developed market that's quite advanced and quite sort of quality sensitive as well. I think the Japanese market, there's been a lot of skepticism among some analysts that they can really succeed there, because
by quality sensitive you mean among the consumers?
Yeah, so Japanese consumers, as I understand it, are less sort of worried about price and more sort of concerned about having something that's really top notch and works and gives you the latest and greatest sort of performance characteristics. And that's
consistent with how I'd assume the Japanese tech
that's a really
market
hard environment to make OpenRAN work in, because if you talk to pretty much anybody who knows about mobile technology and networks and how it works, they all sort of say it's a couple of generations behind still. It's still got things to prove, and but it is unproven by definition.
Well, I think, forgive me if I'm wrong, because I'll certainly defer to your greater expertise on this matter, but I didn't think we thought OpenRAN would be sort of commercial grade yet, did we?
Well, they claim to have it. I mean, they've launched services in April.
Yeah, which is slightly surprising, is my point.
Yeah, and they now have 1 million plus subscribers, they say, which is maybe not as good as... I mean, they haven't done what Reliance Jio did in India, where it launched and all of a sudden it was on its way to becoming one of the top. I mean, they're still quite a long way behind the three incumbents, but
they haven't been given a leg up by the government
to expectations. They haven't been given a leg up by the government, as far as I'm aware. They haven't sort of. I mean, I think the government's quite excited about what they're doing potentially, because they're using, and one of the things they're doing is using Japanese equipment makers that haven't really been the most prominent firms internationally for the last sort of decade or so, and they're kind of giving these companies an opportunity to come into the Rakuten network, and then maybe, because people are looking at what Rakuten's doing and they're looking for OpenRAN as an alternative to what's happened for the last 10, 15 years, why don't we go for some of the same suppliers as well? And if they can prove themselves there, then maybe they could work in the US or Europe. So NEC and Fujitsu are now starting to become, we talked about this before, but they're starting to become options, it seems, elsewhere.
Right.
But I mean, the big thing about their latest updates has been very much on that sort of international expansion front. They're not trying to be an operator in other markets, but they're trying to
license their
they're trying to sort of they're pitching themselves. They're using this unvendor which they haven't actually. In fairness to them, they've not gone out with a big campaign with press releases calling themselves the unvendor, but it is an expression that
with wild-eyed, crazy-haired evangelists.
Exactly, it is an expression that Tarek Amin's used a couple of times, and he's obviously taken inspiration from T-Mobile with its whole uncarrier thing. Do that role, but try and differentiate yourself from the guys that are already there. So they've set up this system they're calling the Rakuten Communications Platform, which, as I understand it, is like a sort of storefront that you can go to as an operator, and you can sort of pick and choose some of the tools that Rakuten is using in its domestic deployment.
Yeah,
automation tools,
which is supposed to be what OpenRAN's all about.
Exactly, and OpenRAN itself is heavily software based. So this was the thing this week, is that Altiostar, which is the OpenRAN software company that Rakuten's using, it also happens to be a company that Rakuten owns a majority stake in, is now a part of the Rakuten Communications Platform. It wasn't before.
Okay.
So you can before it was sort of core network features, I think, and automation stuff and orchestration things. Now the idea is that you can also get your radio access network stuff from this platform as well. So I'm guessing how it would work is that, if you're an operator building an OpenRAN network, you could go to Rakuten, take
off the peg,
take the Altiostar software through this RCP. The hardware side is obviously different. You can't get that stuff.
But that's supposed to be commoditized.
But it's supposed to be commoditized, so that then it runs off the hardware you're installing, and hey presto, a few clicks of a button. And you're up and running.
The whole point, my understanding of the whole point of OpenRAN was to create. Well, it was two main points. Leaving aside the threat that it poses to. Have a go at this hemisphere here, mate.
I'm gonna crack into a hemisphere actually.
Yeah, it's all right. Good call. You bought that. I like the way they call them session IPA. You can have
slightly weaker.
You can have more than one or two without collapsing into the gutter. It's just basically creating that sort of virtualized thing that has been the case in normal IT for a while. So no one gives a toss who the vendors are within a data center.
Yeah.
Those are just racks and racks and racks of servers. That may or may not use Intel or AMD or even ARM architecture chips. That's where NVIDIA's been doing really well.
Yeah.
We'll see how I feel, but a nod to the fact that NVIDIA wants to buy ARM is an interesting angle on that. And then it's just the software over that. It just needs to be able to host the software. Then the software itself has to obviously be standardized such that it can interact with all other software, and then you just get this. You get this off the peg marketplace where you can, I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than this. You go, right, I want more of this, less of that, mix and match, throw it all in, Bob's your uncle, sort of thing. And that seems to be what Rakuten's sort of taking it upon itself to present to the market. Is that correct?
It is, and I'm sceptical of the whole sort of RCP rather proposition to some extent. Partly from kind of talking to a couple of people about Gabriel Brown, who's a heavy reading analyst. Remember chatting to him about
He's been on
it
the pod.
They've had two big announcements in the last couple of weeks. They had one where they sort of announced that Altiostar would become a part of RCP, and what triggered that to some extent was their relationship with an Indian systems integrator called Tech Mahindra, which used to own a stake.
I've interviewed them at Mobile Congress a few times.
Yeah, and they're big. They're big in the market. They have a big presence. But they've basically sold. They used to own a stake in Altiostar as well. They've sold that to Rakuten, which Rakuten on the call said was. Their sort of rationale for that was that they needed to have control of Altiostar to be able to put it in RCP. And from Tech Mahindra's perspective, it's not giving up on Altiostar. What Tech Mahindra's doing is it's becoming a reseller of the RCP platform. So RCP is something that they would also be able to promote themselves, which is significant because they have such a big established footprint with telcos around the world, something Rakuten doesn't have, I'm guessing, to the same extent.
So basically they've got well in there with a really big system integrator, basically. Yeah,
so not only is Tech Mahindra now a big part of RCP, that you have the ability to go and use Tech Mahindra as a systems integrator, they're also actually reselling the RCP platform. So they've attached themselves to this system that is using Altiostar technology. Yeah. And the other announcement they had was with Telefonica, where they've basically announced this procurement deal with Telefonica, and they're kind of pooling OpenRAN resources. And
which I interpreted as Telefonica hanging on to Rakuten's
very
coattails.
much so, I think. Yeah, I think Telefonica said, look, Rakuten's doing quite well here.
Yeah, we'll have some of that.
We'll have some of that, yeah. That where I find the sort of RCP thing where I'm a bit sceptical is that RCP wasn't really a part of the announcement with Telefonica, but it was shunted into the bottom of the press release, I noticed. It was, there were four elements to the memorandum of understanding that the two companies did.
MOUs.
And then there's this sort of one sentence at the bottom of the press release saying, and Telefonica's also, we're also
like
interested in getting Telefonica to use RCP.
Yeah.
And the other thing was Dish Network did a deal quite recently for its 5G core, with Nokia, as it happens.
Yes.
Now, you'd have expected that some of that stuff would have come through Rakuten and RCP. I mean, we know
because we know Dish has spoken about.
Very much looked to Rakuten as a kind of example of where to go and what to do.
Yeah.
And yet, when I spoke to Gabriel Brown, he was saying, well, it seems that pretty much all the stuff they're getting on the core has come through Nokia. It looks like a bit of a setback for RCP. I mean, talking to Rakuten this week, it's very clear they haven't got any customers yet for RCP. They don't.
So there's lots of press releases and big talk.
There's lots of press releases. Now, that's fair enough because it's early days and they're only just starting off. They're trying to publicise it. They're trying to prove that things work in Japan, and then they go to market and make a bigger push. But Gabriel was saying, he's quite sceptical that big operators would necessarily want to buy a lot of this stuff from another operator anyway.
Well, that was always, I agree with Gabriel on that. It was always a question mark, wasn't it?
And then I think my issue with it is, if you're promoting OpenRAN as a kind of, it's not just OpenRAN even, it's just this idea that the technology ecosystem, the telecom network ecosystem needs to become more open and there's less vendor lock-in.
Yeah.
And we don't get these sort of mini group, these mini ecosystems
silos.
Within these silos. RCP almost seems to be a silo within that. I mean, the very fact that they own a stake in Altiostar now means they have a vested interest in promoting Altiostar over companies that compete against Altiostar, like Mavenir
clear
and Parallel
conflict
Wireless.
of interest.
There's a massive conflict of interest, and if you're selling RCP as this big sort of OpenRAN deal, it isn't really. It's just Altiostar stuff, And I reached out to Mavenir and Parallel Wireless about this and haven't actually had official comments from them on the record, but I did get a statement from Parallel Wireless that they're a little bit dubious about the whole Tech Mahindra selling its... I mean, one of the issues with Tech Mahindra is apparently in the past, Parallel Wireless has had things lined up, and Tech Mahindra has been the big systems integrator on that project, and it said, we don't want to work with Parallel Wireless, we want to work with Altiostar. And
so we're getting back to vendor lock-in again, just through another route.
Exactly, and the person at Parallel Wireless that I've been sort of collaborating with, one of the press spokespeople there, said, well, we're not completely convinced that just because they're selling their stake in Altiostar, they're a reseller, of the Altiostar system, essentially. So they don't look as though they've become very agnostic, as they like to say.
And you look at the coincidence of them selling it and then them becoming some kind of tier one VAR for it. It makes you feel like it's part of the deal, wouldn't it? Yeah.
And I think the only way that Rakuten's going to prove that it isn't that it isn't this sort of mini ecosystem that's all about Rakuten's preferred partners and companies that it owns, which is very nice for Rakuten if it can go and sell this around the world, obviously. The only way it's going to address that is if someone like Mavenir and Parallel Wireless gets included in RCP as well. And if you're coming to it, you have the option of using one of several competitors.
Of course, and everyone else.
And they denied on the call when I asked Tarakimin about it. They said it's not a closed ecosystem. It's very much about getting other companies in.
Which they would.
So they would say that, but it remains to be seen.
Let's see. Prove it then.
And the trouble is, the fact they have a stake in Altiostar, there's a conflict, like you just said, there's a conflict of interest. They'd have to buy Mavenir and Parallel Wireless and put them in RCP for it to look like a level playing field.
So I think, and so the moral of the story is that's the way business works. Is it's not purely meritocratic. Companies are always going to look to create sort of advantages, asymmetries, certain ways in which the market is sort of obliged to go with them.
Yeah.
We were talking about Apple earlier. I mean, I think they've done it. While you could criticise them for value of money, they've done it in quite an open way. They said, we think we're better than everyone else. We think our platform's better than everyone else, and we're going to charge accordingly. And then people like you and Pierre make your value for money choice, and that's absolutely fine. But then when you get sort of near monopolies, which Apple certainly doesn't have, it's got plenty of competitors in every space it works in. Actually, except for, Apple does have a near monopoly when it comes to with Google. They've got a duopoly on digital platforms, which is another story, which maybe we'll talk about in another pod. Yeah. But that's interesting. But they're all aspiring to this point where customer choice is limited, because this is just basic Adam Smith stuff. When customer choice is limited, you can charge a premium.
Yep.
And that's just the way things are always going. That's why we have to have regulation. Sometimes, I'll get people going, well, I thought you were a free market. I thought you were all laissez-faire, survival of the fittest, law of the jungle. Yep. No. Again, back to Adam Smith, he was one of the first people to say overtly the only way the free market works is with regulation, because if you give people half a chance, they'll fuck everyone else over.
Yep.
That's just human nature. So without casting any aspersions or allegations at Rakuten, they're going to naturally. And another thing people forget about companies or any organisations is consists of individuals who are all put on little micro incentives, which are normally commercial. So there's an overwhelming cultural incentive to create beneficial commercial circumstances for yourself in order to hit your numbers and all that sort of thing. So of course they're going to naturally gravitate towards having this Rakuten system be not closed, but certainly more constrained than the spirit of OpenRAN is supposed to be. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
And you know, I applaud what they're trying to do. And obviously, Tarek Amin's a very well respected guy, and they're an exciting organisation. But I think this RCP stuff for me, it's just, you know, I mean, the kind of open standard. You know, if they can package up Altia Star software and sell that through RCP, and then it really works in the way that you buy any hardware and this stuff works on it. That's great. That's sort of a validation of the fact that these OpenRAN specifications, you know, are working really, because that's the only way it could. You know, that's the only way it could work is if there's some kind of standardized system where out of the box its software is going to work with anybody's hardware. But if your only choice for software is Altia Star through RCP, then you know,
I think that will make RCP a failure, because I think sooner or later, you know, as maybe you were inferring with Dish, sooner or later people will go, well, do you know what, we won't bother then.
Yeah, well, they're all just going to be, unless operators are all going to become carbon copies of Rakuten using exactly the same vendors, which is hardly a competitive market, is it? So
okay, we better move that one along, because coming up to the hour. So Mobile Congress. So I wrote about this yesterday. I presume you did, or someone on Light Reading did.
I wrote about it, and I referred back to your original story on the 20% redundancies stuff that you.
Oh, right, back in the day.
Even though Bloomberg claimed to have scooped it. A few weeks ago.
Yeah, that was a funny thing by itself. I definitely did scoop it.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, Bloomberg wrote a story.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't want to point any fingers, but it's funny how Bloomberg suddenly got that story.
You heard it here first, folks.
It is, yeah. Well, I mean, you've got to sort of acknowledge a scoop, and that was not acknowledging a scoop. And
no, I mean, if I had to guess, I would say that someone within the GSMA just went, you know,
Telecoms.com's got it. We better give it to other people now as well.
Well, yeah, and also, you know, I don't think I've necessarily made too many allies around people I write about because of the style of my writing. So I would imagine they'd think, okay, if Scott's going to go with it, God knows what crazy shit he's going to come up with. Let's at least try and channel it through a more respectable
maybe they
title.
Thought that, yeah.
Because I don't want to in any way diss the journalist who wrote it up. I bumped into him back in the day. He used to just be a regular jobbing tech journalist.
Yep.
But yeah, maybe they wanted some control. God knows. This is all speculation. I don't know anything about it. But anyway, yeah. So thanks for referring to that. And so this particular time, the announcement is that Mobile Congress, which is going to be the first week of March, I believe.
Yeah. It's always late February, early March.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah.
They've postponed it till the end of June.
Yeah.
And
they've almost swapped one show with another,
with Shanghai. I know that was a bit weird.
It sort of swiveled.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. I'm not quite sure what the thinking was there, and I haven't got any clarification on that. But yeah, I mean, the thinking's quite clear. You know, we're in the UK now. At the time we're recording this, which is 24th of September, I think. We're just going through everyone shitting themselves over a second lockdown, and the government saying that we can only get pissed till 10 o'clock and all that sort of thing. I love some of the memes about. I saw one meme about they said the virus before 10 o'clock, and it showed a normal gremlin. Do you remember the film Gremlins from the 80s? And the virus after 10 o'clock, and it showed the bad gremlin.
Yeah, I think they should reverse that rule and make it opens at 10 p.m. until like 1. People won't bother. They'll be like, oh, sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then everyone's going to be so hungover the next day they won't leave the house anyway. Job done. Of course, we'll all die of liver cirrhosis, but as long as it's not coronavirus. And so we've got all this bullshit going on, which, you know, I'll put my cards on the table. I'm now just think it's all bollocks. You know, when was it? 6 months ago, whenever, March, when we were locking down, I was a bit like, okay, I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah.
This is obviously a big deal. Then, you know, I just went along with it all. But now, you know, having seen the numbers, like, the fact that it overwhelmingly affects very old people and very immunocompromised people, and just seeing the really depressing effects economically, which is obviously relates back to this thing.
Yeah,
I'll revert back from the tangent. I just think the decision to lock down again, and then also looking at Sweden, which didn't lock down, and their mortality rate has not been exceptional.
Smaller country, though.
Yeah. No, I agree. There's a degree in which a like-for-like comparison doesn't really apply. But
I think the interesting about Sweden is their mortality rate was quite high, wasn't it, compared to neighbouring countries at first, when they were going through let's just keep people going about their business to some extent. But now it seems they're lower than anybody in Europe. While we're all having a
because they've got, this is what I'm leading up to, because they've got herd immunity.
Yeah.
Now I know at the start I sort of name dropped that I did a microbiology degree, but I always stress that it doesn't count for anything.
Herd immunity was always the wrong expression to use, isn't it? They should have said something like...
It is the correct clinical term, but for public consumption...
But it sounds like you're looking at people as animals. So
and that's how a lot of the media and sort of hysterical idiots like Piers Morgan treated it at the time.
Yeah.
But herd immunity in a clinical sense is what we've already got with other coronaviruses, which cause like 25% of colds, along with rhinoviruses and something else, and obviously influenza and all that sort of thing. It's just there. Well, you get it, but you're never going to get a horrific spike because of herd immunity.
Well, the interesting to me is they're pretty brutal in some instances, but we don't have all this commotion about it. So there was a bad flu, I think it was 2008. It was a few years ago. There was a really bad flu.
Well, people still going on about...
Which passed me by, probably because I was in my 30s at the time, and I was more interested in news about like JP Morgan recovering from the financial crisis. Right. But 20,000 people died that year of the flu in the UK.
It's quite hardcore, isn't it?
And... what are we at in terms of coronavirus at the moment? 48. So it's higher. But
but you can't even trust that number, because when you look at the government numbers they put up now, they put a number up, and they say all people who died within 28 days of testing positive for coronavirus. All people.
Yeah.
So the cliche is you walk in front of a bus, but that still goes down as coronavirus. So there's just so much bullshit going. Anyway,
we should get to the news, because he's going to shut us off in a
minute.
Yeah,
he's going to shut us off. So anyway, just putting my cards on the table there. I think we should just let everyone go about the business and look after the old and vulnerable. Anyway, so, but obviously I'm in a minority, which is why the GSMA is having to make this decision about World Congress. You're about to start a lockdown. Clearly, the whole of winter's just going to be a write-off. Christmas cancelled, etc.
Yeah.
And I think they're right to assume that by the time you get to early March, it's still going to be a shit show.
Yeah.
So they've put it off till the end of June.
Which sounds like, the end of June, Barcelona.
Yeah. No, it'll be hot though, man.
Yeah,
it'll be properly hot.
There'll be a condition in there.
I wouldn't worry about it, because you aren't going to be going.
Okay, well, go on then. I've bleated for a while. You think they're going to...
I agree with you on a lot of the stuff you've said, that there's some overcaution, I think, and I think it's disappointing that these things are getting cancelled. The trouble with MWC Barcelona is that while you can see an opportunity, I think, for smaller events and gatherings, and you're talking about the most extreme thing imaginable, aren't you? It's like getting tens of thousands of people from all over the world into warehouses with no windows. It's like, if we could possibly create an environment for coronavirus to spread,
shaking hands.
That is like the sort of extreme version of it. Therefore, it's the last thing that's going to come back, basically.
Yeah.
It's the very last thing that's going to come back is that sort of thing. And I'm very, very dubious that they've obviously looked at this and they've gone, there's no feasible way we can do this in March, but we'll be all right in June. I don't see it happening.
Yeah, so I think...
And I'd love it to happen. I'm not saying this to try and be an arsehole about...
No, I don't think any of us are. We're not... we'll take a piss out of GSMA as per my supposed scoop back in the day when it's required. But... Look, Mobile Congress is everyone's event. Yeah. It's not. GSMA are the people who trouser all that cash from it. Yeah. But everyone...
Everybody
wants
that to happen.
As a networking event and as a reason to go out on the lash in Barcelona and all that sort of thing.
I do think there's a danger. I think whilst people like us and a lot of executives and certainly smaller exhibitors, I think, actually value it more than big exhibitors, that event. I think it's more important for small companies.
Well, some small companies throw like 50% of their marketing budget into it.
For small companies, I think MWC is really crucial, actually, for a lot of, or mid-sized, maybe I should say, rather than smaller companies. This is the danger I see with this not happening next year, having not happened this year, is that I think the big corporations, the Ericssons, the Huaweis, the Nokias of this world, and others, they adapt to a world where the mega event doesn't happen.
They do their virtual
and they
events
find they can do the stuff that they used to do. I mean, there's been a lot of 5G activity this year, even though MWC didn't happen.
Yeah.
If you're a company building a 5G network, you still need to get a core network vendor. Just because you can't meet someone and have dinner with them doesn't mean you're not going to sign a deal. You're going to have to sign a deal. So this is the danger, I think, is that event becomes seen as something we don't really need to do anymore. And because there's a lot of other, there's the whole sort of Greta Thunberg, we shouldn't all be travelling around the world in planes as much anymore and having these big events that are probably quite environmentally unfriendly. And I just think there's a bit of a backlash anyway against a mega event. Maybe. And I worry about the future of the mega event. I think it could become something that just dies and becomes replaced by smaller events of the kind that we.
I was about to say, you're trying to get us sacked here, bro.
Well,
only joking. In case you're wondering, we work for a company that runs events, but I was only joking.
Organisations do all sorts of events of all sorts of different sizes, though. I mean, I think MWC Barcelona is quite a unique event in terms of how
size.
Big it is. It's 100,000.
Do you know, I heard the other day that it accounts for 6% of the GDP of Spain or some shit like that.
Exactly, and I think the only thing that compares to it is CES maybe in Las Vegas. Whereas a lot of the events that the company we work for puts on are actually small, and I do see a future for those. Yes. Definitely. I think those are the things that are more likely
and they're going to have less scrutiny regarding, let's say, well, I'm not going to name any Informa events, but let's say you got an event that just takes up a couple of halls of the Excel.
Yeah.
No one's going to freak out about that as an epidemiological thing in the way they would Mobile World Congress with 100,000.
Mobile World Congress is people coming over from, at the time it was, I think one of the things back in February, one of the worries was that half the people who come to it coming from China, and it was very much perceived as a Chinese virus to use
back in the day at
the time. So I think,
well, it was. I mean, when it was cancelled back in March, it was still all talk about Wuhan.
But it is literally everybody from all over the world coming to this one spot. Whereas most events aren't like that. They're not that sort of multinational. They're not that big. They're not that crowded even. I mean, you can't walk around the halls in Mobile World Congress without
you're constantly trying to dodge people.
Yeah. And I think everybody.
And what are they going to do? Try and get social distancing in there?
Exactly. I mean, you must be like me. I come back every year. I feel slightly ill at the end of it. I've got some kind of cold that you probably picked up from someone.
I'm normally just knackered.
Yeah.
And hungover.
Yeah.
And fatter. Not from the food, which is shite. In the Fira, that is.
Yeah.
The food around the rest of Barcelona is lush.
But I do want it to happen. I'm not trying to be.
No, of course.
I think it's a brilliant event. It is good for networking.
And we want it all the more for not having had it last year.
And I really hope it happens in June. I'm just worried that it won't. I'm worried that it won't happen.
So my gut feel is that it will. I think the circumstances are completely beyond the control of GSMA.
I think if it happens, it's not going to be 8 or 9 halls. It'll be like 3 or 4.
Really? Why do you think that?
I don't know. I think it'd be ambitious.
You think they might just try and show some kind of compromise? I mean, I think you either do it or you don't. It's my feeling, and so it really depends on the political and cultural climate at the time. And so we're going to have this next round of everyone shitting themselves over winter, and I just think the sheer economic imperative. Government's going to run out of cash to chuck at people for not working.
Yep.
If this June, July is anything to go by, it'll calm down, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I think they've given themselves the best chance possible, and I'm quietly optimistic that it will work.
I hope you're right.
And it's also, not that it's our problem, but it'll be catastrophic for the GSMA's finances if it doesn't, because a lot of the eventual settlement they made after they cancelled this year's Mobile World Congress, which was a good settlement, but a lot of it was towards incentivising people to rebook for 2021.
Yeah.
So they're going to take another massive financial hit if that doesn't happen, which will be a drag for them, obviously. But yeah, that's my feeling. I like you. I hope it will. But unlike you, I just think that the world is going to maybe have finally just gone, look, this shit isn't going away. We've just got to deal with it.
There might even be, even if that doesn't happen, there might be a vaccine. I mean, this is June's next summer almost, and that's when a lot of experts have said that's when all right, it's not going to have been administered to everybody by then, but maybe even the availability of one leads to some change in sentiment about this.
I was actually chatting to someone at GSMA about the announcement, and we were off on the tangent of the vaccine.
Yeah.
My feeling is that in a clinical sense, the vaccine won't be that significant. If you look at vaccines for other respiratory viruses like influenza, they're about 50% effective, something like that.
Yeah.
But
at this point, we'll take that.
Well, quite. Well, I was just leading up to that. But in a political and psychological sense, being able to say there's a vaccine that has almost any level of efficacy will allow governments to go, all right, then, let's get on with things.
Yeah.
So I think that, it might be nitpicking, but I don't think the vaccine will be able to render people definitively immune. No, but it might give everyone the confidence to get on with their lives.
The treatments they've got at the moment, which have already been shown to reduce mortality rates a lot when you end up in
extreme
ICU
cases,
plus a vaccine. If we can get this down to what they estimate at the moment is about 1% of people, fatality rate who get it. If it goes
and hardly anyone, even
if it goes up to 0.5%
even
or less.
Fat, unfit, middle-aged people like me, I'm relatively low risk.
Yeah.
I'm not worried. I haven't been worried from the start.
Only one way to find out.
There we go. All right, man. So we better wrap it up, isn't it? Because you got.
Maybe not actually. I don't know.
No, you keep checking.
Apparently it's been moved. So.
Oh, is it? Okay. Oh, we can whitter on. I mean, it's worth going on as long as possible, given we haven't done one for 2 months.
Although I will need to go to the bathroom at some point after all this.
Okay, so maybe it's
okay. Well, no, there's no point in artificially extending it. Yes, I think one other thing that's worth dwelling on is the telecoms industry's durability throughout all this compared to others.
Yeah.
So we haven't got sacked yet, which is nice.
Well, let's touch wood there.
But, I know lots of other industry, and obviously we're not strictly telecoms industry, we're media industry, but we're media industry that serves the telecoms industry. And I think the telecoms industry's done all right, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think it's held up pretty well. I mean, there's been a decline in revenues for a lot of European operators, but it's not been like Pret a Manger having to sort of sack half its workforce or whatever it's been. I mean, they're in people still need broadband, they still need phones. Those are essential items. In fact, home working means you need your home broadband connection
never needed
even more.
Broadband more than
so. Telecoms, I think
telecoms and digital products as well.
Yeah,
I mean, if anything, they've gone up, things like Zoom. And all that.
Oh god, yeah. I mean, some companies will do very well out of this in our sector. Online firms, a lot of them, e-commerce companies are obviously thriving. Everybody's shopping through Amazon even more than they already did, or buying groceries through a card.
And looking at stock and stuff that other big e-tailers have done well.
Yeah. So there are people doing well out of it, but. Unfortunately, they're the gits who are already pretty well
already doing all right. Yeah, well, like nearly all the tech giants. I mean, it's fallen off in the last week or two, but there was a massive equity spike for all the tech giants.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, the weird thing is this is not a particularly telecoms thing, but we're reminded how a lot of people don't realise what wealth really is, what money is.
Yeah.
And wealth really is manifested as flow. It's you're on paper wealthy. Let's say you got £1 million all stashed in a mattress in notes. You're technically on paper wealthy, but you're not. But you don't actually experience that wealth until you spend that money.
Yeah.
So it's actually about the flow of money, not the accumulation of money. That's why protectionism and mercantilism and that sort of thing is misguided. And what's happened when we have things like this where we artificially stop the flow, you just realise that it affects absolutely everyone.
It's funny you said artificial because it's nature that did it in the end.
I know, but we didn't have to succumb to it. We didn't have to.
Not a Chinese lab.
Yeah.
That was an interesting one. I think
this is how we get banned on YouTube.
That's all gone quiet though. That angle, hasn't it? That it came out of a Chinese lab.
Yeah.
Well, no one knows.
No one really knows where it came from. There's one theory that it's been dormant for years and it's climate change that suddenly released it into the atmosphere or something. That sounds like...
Well, the thing that gets everyone twitchy is how often these novel respiratory viruses come from the Far East. They're just like, what's going on?
This is the latest one on Bloomberg today about how it's mutating to find its way around face masks and hand washing, which sounds bonkers to me. How does it find its way around face masks and hand washing? What does it sort of... Can you project it into someone's brain by thinking badly about them or something?
That sounds like a bullshit story.
It's agile now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's agile. It's got DevOps virus.
Yeah. It's OpenRAN coronavirus.
I'm not even that excited by hand washing and masks. I think you wear a mask, it's going to come out the side. Yeah, there's some degree of protection against someone. Certainly, if they cough or sneeze, definitely there's a protection from a mask. But just general breathing, it's going to come out the side anyway. You can't, unless you're wearing some kind of proper gas mask or something, you're not going to be able to filter it out. And hand washing, I was always skeptical about, because most viruses are extremely fragile little things that can only exist. They have to exist in water droplets. And so, I mean, if you're coming out of a toilet and someone's just used a door handle and it's still wet and you touch it, then definitely there's transmission potential there. But it's only going to last an hour or two. In my very limited expertise on the subject. Anyway, that's got nothing to do with telecoms. But I think it is worth reflecting on the fact that telecoms is doing all right. And hopefully that'll be a reason why Mobile Congress will happen.
I'll drink to that.
Yeah, life goes on. All right, man. We'll wrap it up there. Cheers. Good to see you again, guys.
Salute.
We'll try not to keep you waiting for 2 months for the next one. Patient audience. And thanks for watching, and make sure you join us for the next one.